If anybody out there knows where Jamie is, or if you're giving him food, please just get in touch with the police. Everybody's waiting for him to come home. A mother's voice cracks through the static of a 1990s broadcast, a voice heavy with fear, trembling on the edge of hope. It is a plea that would echo across Greater Manchester for months, and haunt Britain for years. Today on Beyond the Case, we revisit one of the most disturbing abduction cases in modern British history, the disappearance and murder of 8-year-old Jamie Aaron Lavis, a story that shook an entire community, exposed a manipulative predator hiding in plain sight, and revealed how trust, grief, and desperation can become deadly weapons in the hands of a monster. Before we begin, like, comment, and hit the subscribe button so you never miss a new documentary from Beyond the Case. Now, let's go back to where it all started. It was the spring of 1997, and the Lavis family lived on Buckley Street in the Gorton area of Manchester, England. The neighborhood was working class, tightly packed with terraced houses, and alive with the familiar sounds of children playing in the streets. Back then, kids roamed freely, hopping fences, kicking footballs, and chasing each other until their mothers called them in for tea. One of those children was Jamie Aaron Lavis. Jamie was 8 years old, small for his age, standing just under 4 feet tall. His mother, Karen, often bought clothes meant for 5- or 6-year-olds because most outfits simply swallowed his tiny frame. He had the kind of mischievous smile that could brighten the gloomiest Manchester day, a cheeky, adventurous spirit, and a softness that made him instantly lovable. His siblings adored him. The neighbors knew him. The streets were his playground. But despite his boldness in the daylight, Jamie was still cautious in the dark. He never stayed out late. He was the kind of child who always made sure to be home before dinner because routine made him feel safe. And on the bank holiday Monday of early May 1997, that routine would be broken forever. May 5, 1997. A bank holiday, a day when families relax, children play for hours, and no one worries too much about the passing time. It was around 5 o'clock in the evening, and Karen began setting the dinner table. The Lavis home was warm, filled with the comforting sounds of pans clattering, siblings chattering, and the familiar rituals of a family meal. But as everyone sat down, one seat remained empty. Jamie's. At first, the family assumed he'd simply lost track of time. It happened. Children get caught up in games and adventures, in the bliss of a long weekend. But as the minutes stretched into hours, concern turned to panic. By 8 o'clock, with not a single sign of him, the Lavis family took to the streets. Karen, Jamie's father, and the older children spread out across the neighborhood, calling his name, knocking on doors, retracing the places Jamie loved to play. But the streets offered no answers. Night rolled in. Still no sign. Still no Jamie. Finally, late that evening, the family made the call no parent ever wants to make. They phoned the police. And from that moment, everything changed. The disappearance of Jamie Lavis became the largest manhunt in Manchester since the infamous Moors murders. Police mobilized instantly. Officers swept through the neighborhood. Helicopters flew overhead. Volunteers poured into the streets with search dogs, torches, and leaflets. Television broadcasts flashed Jamie's small face across the nation. His mother's trembling plea was replayed again and again. People swore they had seen him. Tips flooded in. Sightings came from every direction. But one sighting, one witness, would soon take center stage. And his involvement would become the most chilling part of the entire case. A few days into the search, Jamie's sister was approached in the street by a local man. He asked her, would he happen to be wearing a dark blue Reebok tracksuit? Her heart dropped. Yes, that was exactly what Jamie had been wearing. The man's name was Darren Vickers, a 28-year-old bus driver who lived just a few streets away. Darren told the Lavis family, and later told police, that he had seen Jamie on his bus earlier that day. According to him, the little boy had purchased a day-saver ticket and spent nearly the entire day riding back and forth, looking out of the window like he was sightseeing, before Darren eventually dropped him near home. It was an odd story. But the Lavis family was desperate for answers, and Darren seemed calm, confident, and sympathetic. He spoke softly. He offered details. He appeared genuinely concerned. And for a family drowning in fear, his presence felt like a lifeline. But soon, that lifeline would tighten around them like a noose. In the days and weeks that followed, Darren Vickers inserted himself deeper and deeper into the Lavis family's world. He wasn't just providing information. He was positioning himself as their anchor. He attended every search effort, every meeting, every public appeal. He spoke to the media on the family's behalf. So frequently, in fact, that officers began referring to him as the kingpin of the Lavis circle. In front of the cameras, Darren appeared emotional, almost protective of the family. "I feel he's still alive," he said. "Somebody out there knows where Jamie is." The Lavis family trusted him. They defended him. They leaned on him. But the police, trained to look beyond emotion, were beginning to ask a dangerous question. Why was this man so invested? What was he hiding behind that soft, helpful exterior? Why did he seem to know things before others did? And more importantly, why did he want to be so close to the Lavis family? As more passengers from the 219 bus came forward, the police began to realize something was wrong. Terribly wrong. Their stories contradicted Darren's version of events. Darren had described Jamie as quiet, a calm boy who simply rode the bus all day. But witnesses reported the opposite. Jamie had been lively, curious, playful, standing near the driver, pretending to hand out tickets, playing with the bus's interior, turning the long route into his own playground. One witness said the boy had been so energetic, it would have been impossible for the driver not to notice. Another said children weren't even allowed to buy day-saver tickets, contradicting Darren's key detail. Police also uncovered something else. Darren had only been a bus driver for a few days before Jamie vanished. And when investigators looked into his job references, almost all of them were fake. Except one. And that one belonged to a man later identified as a convicted pedophile. This concludes part 1 of the documentary. In part 2 we dive deeper into the chilling CCTV footage that rewrote everything. How Darren manipulated the Lavis family and the media. The moment he moved into their home. The discovery in the woods. And the shocking confession that he later denied. While testimonies from passengers were troubling, the police knew they needed something concrete, something undeniable. So detectives went back to the beginning. The bus station. The starting point of Darren's story. 4 hours, officers sat hunched over grainy CCTV footage from May 5, 1997. They watched every angle, every moment, every frame. And then, there he was. A tiny figure in a dark blue tracksuit. Jamie. But what the police saw next contradicted everything Darren had ever said. Darren wasn't a passive driver. He wasn't simply a man doing his job. The footage showed him approaching Jamie, leaning down, ruffling his hair. They spoke for several minutes. Darren seemed relaxed, almost too relaxed, as if this wasn't their first interaction. He wasn't a stranger. He wasn't uninvolved. He wasn't telling the truth. The entire narrative Darren had fed the Lavis family, and fed the nation, began to crumble. And this time, the police were done giving him the benefit of the doubt. Detectives began digging deeper into Darren's past. What they found was alarming. He had provided fake references to secure his job. The one real reference he supplied came from a man later identified as a convicted pedophile. Darren had been a driver for only a few days before Jamie disappeared. He showed unusual obsessiveness about the case. To the outside eye, he seemed like a helpful neighbor. But to investigators, the mask was slipping. Still, there was one major obstacle. The Lavis family trusted him more than the police. Darren had worked his way into the very heart of the family's grief. While officers viewed him as suspicious, Karen and her husband viewed him as a godsend. A compassionate, supportive man helping them through the worst moment of their lives. The emotional bond was so strong that sharing police concerns with the family became nearly impossible. If detectives even hinted that Darren might be involved, the parents pushed back fiercely. "We've been out virtually 24 hours a day," Karen said. "Darren is like part of the family now." Police knew they had to proceed carefully. This was no longer just an investigation. It was a psychological battlefield. As media interest intensified, officers organized a reconstruction of Jamie's last known movements, a standard procedure in high-profile missing child cases. They expected Darren to decline. Instead, he volunteered. Not only that, he requested to be filmed with Jamie's father and older brother, replaying his alleged interactions with the boy. It was an unsettling sight. A man who was not a relative, not a family friend, not even a long-term acquaintance, standing in front of cameras as if he belonged there. Police officers on scene took note. Why was Darren so eager to control the narrative? Why was he always present, always talking, always positioning himself as the center of the story? His behavior wasn't just unusual, it was dangerous. The more Darren inserted himself into the family's life, the more uncomfortable the community became. Neighbors whispered. Reporters raised eyebrows. Even the Lavish children noticed he was always around, always watching. But grief makes good people vulnerable. The Lavis family was exhausted, broken, and desperate for answers. Darren knew this, and he used their pain as a tool, a tool that gave him access, visibility, and influence. Within weeks, Darren was answering the phone in their home. He was joining police briefings uninvited. He was giving media interviews on their behalf. And shockingly, he moved into the Lavis family home. Detectives were horrified. A prime suspect was now sleeping under the same roof as his victim's grieving parents. It was unprecedented. It was dangerous. And it gave Darren precisely what he wanted: control. Darren's narcissism eventually pushed him too far. In the middle of the investigation, with national attention fixed on the case, Darren phoned a local radio station. What? On air. He calmly described, in vivid detail, his final alleged conversation with Jamie. According to his story, Jamie had nowhere to go. His parents weren't home. He was frightened. So Darren, being kind, offered to drop him off near his house. Listeners were stunned. Why was the supposed witness calling a radio station? Why was he inserting himself yet again, this time publicly, into the narrative? But then came the moment the public could not ignore. Callers began phoning in. Not with sympathy, but with suspicion. Something was off about the way Darren spoke. The emotion sounded rehearsed. The timeline felt inconsistent. And his tone didn't match that of a man traumatized by a child's disappearance. This was the beginning of the end. Summer began to fade, and with it, the hope that Jamie was alive. Detectives could no longer deny what the evidence and behavior suggested. Jamie had not run away. He had not wandered off. He had not spent all day on a bus. Someone had harmed him. And that someone was almost certainly Darren Vickers. But despite their suspicions, officers lacked solid physical evidence. They needed something, anything, to hold him legally. In the end, it was something mundane that gave them their opening. Darren had several outstanding driving offenses. It wasn't much, but it would get him off the streets, away from the Lavis home, and away from the family he was manipulating. He was arrested and sentenced to 10 weeks in prison, a small window of opportunity for investigators to move without interference. During that brief period, detectives worked relentlessly to dismantle Darren's story. Heavy checkmark, they re-interviewed witnesses. Heavy checkmark, they reviewed footage again. Heavy checkmark, they tracked his past behaviors. Heavy checkmark, and they discovered he had approached other young boys in the area late at night. One teenager said Darren led him toward a wooded area. When the teen asked why, Darren pointed into the darkness and whispered, "I think that's him." The boy fled. If he hadn't, there is little doubt he would have become another victim. By mid-October, detectives had assembled enough circumstantial evidence to arrest Darren on suspicion of abducting Jamie. October 14th, 1997. The day Darren's grip on the Lavis family finally snapped. But emotional bonds don't break easily. Even as police took Darren in, the Lavis parents claimed the detectives had drawn a blank and were arresting the wrong man. Karen and her husband waited outside the station crying. They even held a small celebration when Darren was released due to insufficient evidence. Darren emerged from the police station a martyr in their eyes, a victim of police incompetence. He capitalized on this sympathy immediately. He invited a film crew to the Lavis home. He proclaimed his innocence on camera. He insisted the police were harassing him. He held Jamie's siblings as he spoke. It was manipulation on a horrifying scale. But while Darren peddled lies to the nation, detectives were quietly following the breadcrumb trail he didn't know he had left behind. That trail led straight into the woods. As new witnesses came forward, particularly teenage boys Darren had approached, a recurring pattern emerged. The woods. The same wooded area. Again and again. Mentioned by different teens. On different nights. Described the same way. One boy said Darren showed him a photograph of Jamie and pointed ahead into the trees. Another said Darren gave Jamie's brother a cigarette, took him deep into the woodland and ominously warned, "This is where he is. And if you don't behave, this is where you'll end up too." Those statements weren't just chilling. They were confessions disguised as threats. Police launched a meticulous search of the area, a search that would bring one of the darkest discoveries Manchester had ever seen. The woods sat half a mile from the footpath, quiet, overgrown, and undisturbed. To most people in the community, it was just another patch of greenery in a crowded urban sprawl. But to detectives, it was something else entirely. A place Darren had repeatedly led boys toward. A place he had shown photographs. A place he had taken Jamie's 11-year-old brother. A place he seemed to know far too well. Officers entered at dawn. The search was slow, methodical, and painfully delicate. Leaves cracked beneath boots. Dogs sniffed. Gloves shifted through damp soil. Every movement was cautious, deliberate, silent. Hours passed. A detective lifted a corner of thick tarpaulin hidden beneath a pile of branches. Underneath it were small pieces of clothing, faded, soiled, and eerily familiar. Clothes that matched exactly what 8-year-old Jamie Lavis had been wearing the day he vanished. A hush fell over the search team. They knew, instinctively, this was no longer just an abduction inquiry. This was now a homicide investigation. But the discovery was not over. The clothing was carefully lifted, piece by piece, and laid out on a clean surface for examination. Officers gathered nearby, their faces tight with dread. Among the small garments, wrapped in fabric, was a tiny human jawbone. The room fell into a suffocating silence. There are moments in an investigation that mark an irreversible turning point. This was one of them. Jamie had not wandered off. He had not boarded another bus. He had not been hidden or sheltered. He had been killed. And the person who had embedded himself so deeply into the Lavis family, living under their roof, eating at their table, comforting their children, had almost certainly done it. But detectives needed more evidence. They needed confirmation. They needed answers. They needed justice. And so the search continued. Over the following days, officers combed through the woodland inch by inch. What they found was devastating. More scattered fragments of human remains, small bones, disarticulated, separated by distance, carried away by time, weather, and wildlife. Not all were recovered. Many would never be found. It was one of the most emotionally taxing searches Manchester police had ever conducted. Every officer knew they were looking for a child. Every discovery felt like a punch to the chest. In the forensic lab, DNA testing on 2 milk teeth provided confirmation. The remains were those of Jamie Aaron Lavis. The cause of death could not be determined due to decomposition, but detectives were certain. This was no accident. This was no natural tragedy. This was murder. Once the remains were confirmed, detectives wasted no time. They arrested Darren Vickers and charged him with the abduction and murder of Jamie. But the Lavis family, grief-stricken, exhausted, and manipulated for months, struggled to accept what police were telling them. They could not reconcile the Darren they knew with the monster investigators believed him to be. After all, he had sat on their couch, shared their meals, slept under their roof, held their children, walked the streets with them searching for Jamie. He had become a surrogate son, a brother, a support system. The betrayal was too massive to comprehend. Karen later said that when she heard the charges, she felt physically sick, not just from the loss of her son, but from the realization that they had unknowingly invited evil into their home. Following his arrest, Darren was placed in a cell and interviewed. Hours passed, then more hours, and eventually, he broke. Darren confessed to abducting Jamie. He confessed to sexually abusing him. And he confessed to murdering him. To the detectives working the case, it was the first moment of truth after months of deception. But Darren was not finished with his manipulation. Not even close. Just days later he called the media, not the police, and retracted the entire confession. He claimed he had said what detectives wanted to hear. He claimed he had been pressured. He claimed he was innocent. It was a last-ditch attempt to confuse the narrative, to cling to his facade, to paint himself once again as a victim. But this time, his lies could not save him. The evidence was overwhelming. The timeline was clear. And his behavior, his obsession, his manipulation, his proximity, was impossible to explain away. The trial was set, and the whole nation waited. 2 years after Jamie disappeared, Darren Vickers stood in the dock at Manchester Crown Court. The trial lasted 7 weeks. 7 long, grueling weeks filled with forensic testimony, witness statements, and emotional accounts from the Lavis family. The prosecution argued that Darren had targeted Jamie, had used his job to gain access to the boy, had lured him into his car at the end of his shift, had taken him into the woods, had sexually abused and murdered him, and had dismembered his body. They described Darren as a man with a morbid fascination with children, with crime, and with media attention. But the trial was far from straightforward, because Darren had one final, monstrous accusation to unleash. In a desperate attempt to save himself, Darren did something unforgivable. He accused Jamie's own father of killing him. He claimed that he and Jamie's mother, Karen, had been having an affair. He claimed she was pregnant with his child. And he claimed that during a family argument, Jamie's father had murdered his son. It was a vile, calculated, and deeply disturbing tactic. One designed to hurt, to shock, to disrupt the trial, and to shift the blame back onto the family he had already emotionally violated. Karen was forced to undergo a blood test to prove she was not carrying Darren's child. The results were clear. His allegations were complete fabrication. The courtroom was stunned. The Lavis family was shattered. The jury saw through the manipulation instantly. It was the moment Darren sealed his own fate. After 7 weeks, the jury returned with a unanimous decision. Guilty. Darren Vickers was found guilty of the abduction and murder of 8-year-old Jamie Lavis. The judge, Mr. Justice Forbes, praised the detectives and notably, the teenagers who had bravely come forward with their accounts of Darren's suspicious behaviors. He awarded those teenagers £150 each from public funds for their courage. Darren was sentenced to life in prison, with a minimum term of 25 years before parole eligibility. But even in prison, Darren continued his pattern of disturbing behavior. He bragged to other inmates about the details of the crime. He claimed he had outsmarted the police. He acted as though Jamie's death made him important. Detective Chief Superintendent Roy Rainford later said he believed arresting Darren prevented a serial killer from emerging. He was right. Everything about Darren's pattern, his grooming behaviors, his manipulation, his obsession with the case, pointed to a predator escalating toward greater violence. Prisoners have their own codes. And even behind bars, Darren could not escape consequences. In 2014, over a decade after his conviction, Darren was attacked with a hammer by another inmate. He suffered 3 skull fractures, broken bones in his hand, severe head injuries. The attack nearly killed him. But Darren survived, though permanently damaged. Some saw it as prison justice. Others saw it as further tragedy in a case full of pain. For the Lavis family it mattered little. They had already lost the one thing that could never be restored. The Lavis family will never stop talking about Jamie. Photos of the smiling 8-year-old cover the walls of their home. His siblings tell their own children about the uncle they never met. Karen says she still feels his presence every day, in the house, in the memories, in the silence that follows grief. Time has moved on. But pain does not obey time. Still, the family honors Jamie's memory through love, through storytelling, through resilience. They survived something no family should ever endure. And they continue to survive it, day after day. Gordon was never the same after Jamie disappeared. In the years that followed, residents described a permanent shift in the atmosphere, a kind of collective grief that lingered in the streets where children once played freely. Parents tightened their watch. Schools revised safety protocols. Children were taught to fear strangers in ways earlier generations never imagined. Before Jamie, the neighborhood had been open, trusting, and communal. Kids wandered from one doorstep to another, knocking on friends' doors, running through alleyways, and hopping on buses without fear. After Jamie, everything changed. Normal childhood freedoms were replaced with curfews, supervision, and a level of caution that felt suffocating but necessary. One resident said, "Children used to have the run of the streets. After Jamie, you didn't let them out of your sight." Another said, "We lost our innocence when we lost Jamie." His case became one of the most cited examples in Greater Manchester when discussing child safety, trust, and the dangers hiding in plain sight. One of the most chilling aspects of the case was Darren Vickers' ability to fool nearly everyone around him. He didn't act like a predator. He didn't hide in the shadows. He didn't run. Instead, he stepped into the spotlight, willingly. He stood in front of cameras. He cried with the family. He led search efforts. He became the face of concern. Reporters interviewed him dozens of times. He appeared on television so frequently that the public began recognizing his voice. And for months, the nation believed him. This phenomenon later became known in media circles as the Good Samaritan illusion, when a criminal inserts themselves into an investigation, disguising guilt beneath a facade of helpfulness. In lectures, crime analysts still use Darren's case as a textbook example. The warning is always the same. It is not always the quiet stranger you must fear. Sometimes, it is the person offering to help. Though the case was legally solved, many questions remain, questions haunting investigators, journalists, and most painfully, the Lavis family. Some of those questions include, how did Darren choose Jamie? Was it planned? Or was it opportunistic? Was Darren watching the Lavis family before the disappearance? His familiarity with them afterward raised disturbing possibilities. Would Darren have killed again? Detectives believe he was on the path toward becoming a serial killer. But how close was he? And were there earlier attempts we simply don't know about? Why did he insert himself into the investigation so deeply? Was it arrogance? Guilt? A desire for fame? Or simply the thrill of controlling the narrative? And the darkest question of all, what happened during the final moments of Jamie's life? The forensic evidence could not determine a cause of death. The wood swallowed too much. For the Lavis family, these unanswered questions form a painful silence, an ache that fills the spaces where truth should be. For families who lose a child, grief is not linear. It's not neat. It doesn't follow simple stages. Grief in child murder cases is a lifelong sentence. Jamie's father struggled deeply after the truth emerged, especially after being falsely accused during the trial. The emotional wounds left by Darren's lies cut almost as deeply as the loss itself. His siblings carried their own guilt. For not walking home with him. For not seeing signs sooner. For trusting Darren. For feeling safe in the presence of the man who murdered their brother. These feelings are common in families of abducted children. But in the Lavis case, the guilt was magnified because the killer had lived among them, not just metaphorically but physically, under the same roof. Karen later said, "We had no chance. He was playing us all. He fooled everyone, including me." No parent heals from that easily. While many parts of the case remain dark, there is one part the family insists on keeping bright. Jamie's memory. His siblings have children of their own now, and each of them grows up knowing about the uncle they never met but still love. Photos of Jamie decorate the walls of the Lavis home, smiling, mischievous, full of life. His mother keeps his belongings safe. Small toys, drawings, a school uniform, a birthday card he never got to give. Karen once shared that she still talks to Jamie in the quiet moments. In the house. I can still feel him. He's still here with us. It is not closure. There is no closure. But it is connection. And that connection keeps the family going. Jamie's case changed more than just a neighborhood. It changed policing methods, community awareness, and media procedures surrounding missing children. Among the lasting impacts. 1. Increased scrutiny of helpful witnesses. Police now analyze witness behavior far more carefully, especially those who volunteer excessive details or insert themselves too deeply. 2. Child safety campaigns in Greater Manchester. Schools introduced new rules on children traveling alone, playing outdoors, and reporting suspicious behavior. 3. Investigative training on manipulators. Darren became a case study in training programs across the UK, illustrating how predators exploit tragedies. 4. Advocacy for DNA retention and forensic development. The scattered remains highlighted the importance of improved recovery techniques and long-term missing person protocols. 5. Community support systems. The Lavis case led to better family support mechanisms for those dealing with child disappearances. These changes do not replace what was lost, but they protect children today in ways that did not exist in 1997. Jamie's story is not an easy one to tell. It is painful. It is heartbreaking. It is terrifying. But it is necessary. Because stories like Jamie's remind us that danger does not always look like danger, that monsters do not always hide in the shadows, and that evil often wears the mask of trust. For the Lavis family, the story did not end with a verdict or a sentence or a prison attack. Their story continues every day, in memories, in photographs, in whispers of what could have been. Jamie should have grown up. He should have gone to school. He should have laughed with friends, become a teenager, become an adult, lived a full life. Instead, his life was taken by a man who wanted power, control, and attention. But Jamie's memory, his spirit, remains stronger than Darren's cruelty. And today, by telling his story, we honor that memory. Jamie Lavis was only 8 years old when his life was stolen. But he left behind a legacy of strength, unity, and awareness. His family fought for answers. His community fought for justice. And the police fought to ensure the man responsible never had the chance to harm another child. This case teaches us that vigilance matters. Compassion matters. And truth, no matter how painful, must always prevail. You've watched this far. Thank you for giving Jamie the time and respect he deserves. And if you'd like to support more documentaries like this, please like, comment, and hit the subscribe button. This is Beyond the Case, and we'll see you in the next episode. Darren displayed classic characteristics of individuals who create or worsen a crisis so they can step in as the savior. Psychologists call this manufactured heroism, a dangerous behavioral pattern typically found in firefighters who start fires to become rescuers, medics who induce fainting in victims to revive them, and predators who insert themselves into investigations to appear helpful. Darren fit the pattern disturbingly well. He wanted to be seen. He wanted to be important. He wanted attention. And Jamie's disappearance gave him a stage. Darren didn't just watch the investigation unfold. He immersed himself in it. He attended briefings. He stood beside police officers. He answered reporters' questions. He studied every rumor, every lead, every search location. One psychologist said, Darren didn't want to avoid the spotlight, he craved it. He needed to witness the chaos he created. Many predators are withdrawn, silent, antisocial. Darren was the opposite. He was chatty. He was friendly. He used emotion strategically. He learned what the Lavis family needed, comfort, and he became it. He shaped himself into their missing piece. These psychological traits made Darren not only dangerous, but extremely hard to detect. Some ask how the Lavis family could trust Darren so fully. But grief changes everything. Fear changes everything. Hope changes everything. And Darren exploited every one of those emotions. He positioned himself as the anchor. During the darkest days, the family was drowning in confusion. Darren stepped forward as the calm in the storm, steady, composed, confident. He always had answers. He spoke like someone who knew more than the average person. He presented theories. He offered information. He speculated convincingly. He was always available. Night or day, Darren showed up. He didn't disappear. He didn't hide. Predators rarely come wrapped in shadows. Sometimes they come wrapped in warmth. And most importantly, he made them feel less alone. That is a powerful thing. An irreplaceable thing. And a manipulative person can weaponize it. The Lavis family carried guilt for years, but psychologists emphasize they were victims too. Their trust was not foolish. It was exploited. They were targeted. Jamie's case became a turning point in UK policing. Detectives realized that traditional profiling did not fit Darren. He wasn't a reclusive offender. He wasn't hiding from attention. He was drawn to it. Training programs added new required modules. Offenders who insert themselves. Recruits now study how killers often join searches or assist families. Jamie's case is one of the central examples. Manipulative witness protocol. Police learned not to share sensitive information with self-appointed helpers. Darren had access to details he never should have known. Behavioral red flags in emotional cases. Detectives are now trained to spot unusual emotional reactions. Excessive empathy. Oversharing. Volunteering constantly. Desire to control the narrative. Refusal to distance themselves from the family. Darren did all of these. Because of Jamie's case, future investigations across the UK became sharper, wiser, and more psychologically informed. Forensic science in the late 1990s was nowhere near today's level. In 2025, investigators can reconstruct partial skeletons, extract DNA from minuscule fragments, use soil chemistry to determine time of death, scan bodies underground with advanced imaging. But in 1997, those tools didn't exist. The woods, weather, wildlife, and time degraded Jamie's remains. By the time they were found, the evidence was too compromised to determine exactly how he died. Forensic officers later said, "If this happened today, we might have answers we never got back then." It is one of the heaviest regrets for everyone involved. Experts who evaluated the case say Darren did not stumble into this crime. He groomed the situation. He groomed the environment. He groomed the community. He chose a job that gave access to children. Bus drivers interacted with school kids daily. He inserted himself into child-friendly spaces. He lingered near bus stops and youth hangouts. He built relationships. With teens. With families. With passengers. He used charm as camouflage. Groomers rarely appear threatening. They appear helpful. Harmless. Friendly. Darren's case is now cited in seminars as a warning. Predators often hide in plain sight, not because they're invisible but because they're helpful. The media coverage surrounding Jamie's disappearance was massive, one of the biggest missing child appeals of the decade. It helped spread awareness. It mobilized volunteers. It kept Jamie's face on everyone's mind. But it also gave Darren exactly what he wanted. An audience. He used cameras to build his persona. He used interviews to solidify his innocence. He used the spotlight to distract from suspicion. Journalists later expressed guilt. "We gave a platform to the man who killed him, thinking he was trying to help." This case permanently changed how media outlets handle interviews with witnesses, coverage of community volunteers, and access to families impacted by crime. Today, reporters are trained to avoid unintentionally amplifying manipulative individuals. Jamie's case taught them why. Even decades later, Gorton still whispers Jamie's name. Older residents remember the search. They remember the posters, the police cars, the late-night broadcasts, the fear in every mother's eyes. Some have small memorials in their windows, candles, drawings, ribbons, photos. On anniversaries, Local residents still leave flowers in the woods where his remains were found. Not because they knew him personally, but because they felt the loss as if he were their own. Jamie became a symbol of vulnerability, innocence, and the preciousness of life. Documentaries rarely explore the what-ifs, but Jamie's story demands it. He might have grown up to be a footballer, a mechanic, a musician, a father, a man with dreams and memories and decades of life ahead of him. His siblings often imagine these alternate futures. One of his brothers once said, "I wonder what he'd look like now. Would he have the same cheeky smile?" His sister once shared, "I think about the birthdays he missed. All of them. Every single one. The tragedy is not only in how he died, but in everything he never got to live." The case is officially closed. The killer was caught. He confessed. He was convicted. Justice was served, at least in the eyes of the law. But justice does not repair a family. Justice does not erase memories. Justice does not silence the what-ifs. The Lavis family carries the wound quietly now, with strength, with dignity, with love. Their home remains filled with photographs and memories, but also with pride. Pride in Jamie. Pride in their resilience. Pride in surviving something that could have shattered them completely. They tell their children, "Your Uncle Jamie was brave. He was loved. And he will never be forgotten." Thank you for staying with us through this extended deep dive into the heartbreaking case of young Jamie Lavis. Some stories must be told fully, gently, and with respect, and Jamie's story is one of them. If you value in-depth, careful true crime storytelling, if you appreciate documentaries that honor victims rather than glorify offenders, please remember to like this video, comment your thoughts, and hit the subscribe button so you never miss a new documentary from beyond the case. Because some cases can only be understood when we go beyond the case.